A very good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of the Department of Biochemistry, Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh, I extend a cordial welcome to our esteemed guest speaker, Professor Anurag Agarwal, Acting Director and Dean Academics, Professor R.K. Ratho, Head of Departments, faculty members, senior and junior residents, demonstrators, students, research scholars, and all distinguished guests. Today, we have the privilege of hosting the 11th Professor R. Nath Memorial Oration titled From Big Data to Foundational AI, The Changing Face of Biomedicine. With great pleasure, I now request Professor R.K. Ratho sir to kindly deliver the brief remembrance of Professor R. Nath and his contributions to the Institute. Sir.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this session. Dr. Anurag Agarwal, the Dean of Biosciences and Health Research, Trivedi School of Biosciences, Ashoka University, Sonipat. And he happens to be the former director of the Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, New Delhi. We have all Dr. Indu Verma, profess- former professors of the Department of Biochemistry, Faculty of Biochemistry, all senior and junior faculty of the institute, and students. Very important. Welcome to this 11th edition of Professor R. Nath Memorial Oration. Professor R. Nath was born in 1932 and he completed his PhD from the Premier Institute of Indian Institute of Sciences, Bangalore. Soon after his PhD, he went to University of California to start his career as a professor, as a faculty in the institute. And then in 1959, and then he joined in this premier institute as a faculty in 1964. Started working from that day, establishing the Department of Biochemistry. And he rose to the post of professor and head, where he headed the department from 1981 to 1992, producing more than 100 postgraduate students, who happens to be the chair of many of the premier institutes in India and abroad. He was very well known in this institute in his academia and research activities. He was a founding member of the International Society for Trace Metal Research, American College of Nutrition, Urolithiasis Society of India, and Indian Academy of Neurosciences. He also was also a fellow of Indian Academy of Medical Sciences, Indian Academy of Neurosciences, Society of Toxicology, and American College of Nutrition. So his basic interest was on trace element metabolism. That much only we knew, because when we entered into, possibly he was superannuated by that time. So used to know that he used to have the special interest on trace elements and neurometabolism. So some of his students also working on brain with rabbits and rats. So that used to be our exposure, very small exposure. So his interest with trace element metabolism and more so with binding proteins to that. So as a professor, he had a contribution of initiation of All India Integrated Program on Assessment of Heavy Metals in Air, Water, Food and Blood Samples. It was funded by the Environment Society, Department of Environment DBT, Government of India. He was a great scientist, researcher, and a teacher par excellence. He, is, he has been remembered for his great contributions in the department and in the institute at large. Unfortunately, after his demise in 2002, the family had thought rightly to institute this Professor R. Nath Oration, and it is the 11th edition of the Oration in this institute, and it's continuously going on. This is being celebrated alternate years. So we are really thankful to the family of Professor Arnath for this kind support, a continuous support to the institute. I am also grateful to Professor Agrawal finding a way through the foggy days, winter season, with uncertainty whether he will be able to reach in time or not. So this is great, and thank you, sir, for coming and gracing this occasion. We will be thank you all for attending this session. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening all of us about Professor R. Nath and his contributions not only to the Department of Biochemistry but also to the Institute. I now request Professor Indu Verma, Head of the Department of Biochemistry, to kindly introduce our distinguished speaker today, Professor Arun Agrawal.
Thanks, Prasanjit. Good evening, everyone. I actually cherish fond memories of Dr. Nath. He was my teacher, my mentor. I still remember the classes which he used to teach us. He was not only an outstanding teacher and researcher, but also a great human being, marked by genuine gentleness. Today, we have 11th Professor R. Nath Memorial Oration in his memory, and it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce the orator, Dr. Anurag Agrawal, a well known physician scientist focusing on the interface of biology, medicine, and data. So, a brief introduction about him. After completing his graduate medical education at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, he pursued training in internal medicine, pulmonary disease, and critical care at Baylor College of Medicine, USA, followed by a PhD in physiology from Delhi University. Subsequently, he joined the Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology of CSIR and then became the director. He also served as an adjunct associate professor at Baylor College of Medicine. Currently, he is Dean, Biosciences and Health Research, Trivedi School of Biosciences, Ashoka University. Dr. Agrawal's research spans respiratory biology and of late reimagining of the health and healthcare through emerging technologies, and all his research work is published in high impact factor journals with more than 1 lakh citations. He serves on several national and international advisory bodies, including the WHO Technical Advisory Group on Viral Evolution. His contributions have been widely recognized through numerous honors, notably the prestigious Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award and the Sun Pharma Foundation Award. His current efforts center on using information technology and big data to visualize and interpret the complex medical data, as well as to enhance the community health programs, particularly in resource constrained settings. As a founding member of the Digital Transformation for Health Lab, DTH Lab, Dr. Agrawal promotes a value based approach to digital innovation in healthcare. And today he is going to speak on this area only. And he's going to speak on from big data to foundational AI, the changing face of biomedicine. I invite Dr. Anurag for his oration. Thank you.
First of all, I must say it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much, Induji, for inviting me. Many years ago, when I was thinking I was going to be a pulmonary doctor, there was only one place in India I would have imagined being an Ashutosh. Here is a person who tread the path well ahead of me. He was far ahead of me in medical school as well. Ending up in PGI Chandigarh, the best place to do lung disease in the country. Unfortunately, I left outside, and the lung journey kind of stopped over there. And as I came back to India, I shifted more and more towards research. This is Ashoka University entrance. My office is right here, actually. So if you're ever there, please do visit. So let's talk about AI. And the reason I really wanted to talk about this topic here, contrary to many decades in which we've talked about AI being transformational, it is truly now at the point where the future is going to change very rapidly. And they say that, you always overestimate the change coming in short periods of time, but you always underestimate the change coming over long periods of time. So we have seen promises like no need for radiologists in 5 years, no need for drivers of cars in 5 years. Elon Musk made one, other people made. Geoff Hinton, the Nobel Prize laureate, made the other. And as of today, the radiologists are still driving to work in their cars, right? More than a decade has passed. But don't take this at face value. There is something fundamentally that has changed. This very famous cartoon from XKC. By the way, those of you who like science cartoons, you must go to this website. Name a topic, you'll find a beautiful thing over here. AI is actually not very different from what they say here. Doesn't matter. Uh, it's basically you pour in the data, you stir it up, you start finding the results that you like, you got a model. How you stir the data, how you pour the data, what do you like are separate questions altogether. But in a digitally transformed world, few things changed. A, there was lots of data. The GPUs became so powerful you could do lots of stirring. But it still boiled down to who decides what is right? Humans are doing annotations, became a rate limiting step. Every time people would talk about, we can do this with AI, find me the doctor who is good and will annotate all your data for you. So for a very long time, nothing changed because ultimately who decides what is right was still dependent on human beings. Some of you in this room are as old as I am to remember this very famous movie, Mahan, Amitabh in a triple role, the father, the son, and the son. So Amitabh could do everything, right? He could be the police officer, he could be the father who loses his kids. Everything was possible. Here is a recent paper just published in Nature. The point was, can you create a new antibody that can recognize a new SARS-CoV-2 variant and bind it and neutralize it better than existing antibodies because all the antibodies had stopped working. Now this is a tough problem. Any virologist, biochemist in the room would say this will take a year to do, right? But what they have here, okay, I'll use this instead. AI, oops, AI has been made the principal investigator. There is AI the immunologist, AI the machine learning specialist, AI the computational biologist, and very importantly, AI the critic. The only thing the human is doing is handing the problem as I have stated to the human next and simply give it to the AI principal investigator. Say, you manage your team for it. All of them go round and round and they keep interacting with each other. And the innovation was the critic. Until the critic is happy that something has truly gone right, you don't go any forward. And a typical conversation could look like this. You can all imagine this conversation in your own lab. Who's the AI? It's all Open API. Open AI's API based prompted. This is your name, this is your title, this is your specialization, this is your role. Everything else is coming out of OpenAI. And this is not even GPT-5, this is a late version of 3. And in the end, they come up, and I'm going to show you the data. They come up with 5 candidates that go into robotic and testing, and two, yeah, you beach mein band ho gaya tha, yeah. And 2 of those 5 antibodies actually worked. Now, this is revolutionary. You effectively have a system in which a team of AIs, 5 of them, more than Amitabh Bachchan and Mahan, work together with different roles to come up with a brand new mutation not previously known. This is transformational. And before I go any further, I just want to quickly tell you one thing. I mean, I was always interested in computer science. Went to medicine. There were many people like me at AIMS Delhi. Eventually, I shifted to genomics where I saw big data. Eventually, shifted out of genomics of big data to other problems. Then started applying machine learning because at some point the data becomes so much, you can no longer work with it directly. And then in the end, start thinking about how the future of health will change in the age of AI. So I'm going to walk you backwards through some of the journey and then forward to the current age of AI, and hopefully it will all make sense. Many years ago, we wanted to ask a very simple question. What ails India? What is the reason for people to visit doctors? And we realized there was no data. There are no EHRs. This is back 2010, 2011. There is no place you can go to find out what ails India at different points of India. In fact, nobody even knew how many doctors there were in India who were practicing. And the only people we could find who knew how many practicing doctors are there were the drug companies. So we asked Cipla for their database. From their database, we basically organized things in such a way that for every smallest unit, we had one doctor. Then we scaled upwards. In the end, we had about 8,000 doctors whom we contacted across India. We asked all of them to maintain one day in their life where every patient was basically a horizontal row. They were things, they would check the things off why the patient came. Based on what they marked in little check boxes, you could organize why the patient came, what are the diseases they have. And then we had a truckload of data, right? 2 lakh patient visits, multiple points, the doctors checked them off. And you could make graphs and graphs and graphs, and you would never reach any point that would illustrate the reason that we did this to understand what ails India. So we took a technique from genomics networks and a technique of graphing called alluvial graphing. The heaviest, biggest network sinks to the bottom, drags its connections with it, and suddenly you can visualize the entire what ails India in a single graph by decades of life. There's, of course, pseudo. These are all organized into 10-year blocks. What you can see, some very simple things. You can see respiratory, and that's why I always say respiratory is the most important disease. Respiratory is the reason for people to be visiting doctors across their lifespans at all ages. But take anemia. You can see anemia was unimportant earlier. The lower it is, the bigger it is, the more important it is. Suddenly, in this age group, 11 to 20, 31 to 40, it keeps becoming important. It drags a line from female genitals, very obviously menstrual anemia of Indian women. You could ask the question for circulatory. You can see it merges endocrine and neurological all together around 41 to 50. I'm not telling you you'll learn anything great that is new. You can dig deeper into the data. But without techniques of network biology applied to medical data, including visualization, it wasn't even possible to image and extract anything from this. Now I'll go one step further. We realized that despite all the concerns about bad air and things like that, Small towns had much higher respiratory symptoms. Now, that's also obvious, right? I mean, small towns don't have clean fuels. Women are 50% of the population. If women are cooking in areas without clean fuel, that could explain it. And women aren't alone in there. The children are also sitting in that house, small children. They are under 20% of the population. If 70% of the population is being heavily exposed by this, that could be the answer. But we never collected any data in our questionnaires about any of this. How can you answer the question, is this potentially being driven by lack of clean fuel? And if so, if we were to improve the fuel penetration, what difference would it make on COPD? So we could do what's called a Bayesian network analysis. We now basically checked where each doctor was from. We assume the patient is from there. We could find the government sales data for LPG cylinders. We could normalize to unit population. We could add that pseudo variable into our graph. And using Bayesian networks, which basically is another way of saying directional graphing, you could say what connects to what. And we could immediately see that LPG units was connected in this networks to obstructive airway disease. That is kind of along the lines of what we expected. And the beauty of this type of data analysis is you can tune one parameter and see what changes in the entire network. There were two other interesting connections. One was whether your doctor had an MBBS degree, because obviously the places that don't have clean fuel also don't have MBBS doctors. And the other was non-specific URI type symptoms. In any case, this was data that the government appreciated. We showed that increasing LPG penetration to say about 70% of the population would be expected to cut obstructive airway disease by half. Now, this was a useful, important finding. This work got published, and then we got more ambitious. To get more ambitious, we decided we should have e-health centers, shipping containers like this, completely cloud connected. We built this in partnership with Hewlett Packard, deployed across the country, all healthcare interactions being recorded, and then you could really do this, not for one day in the life of India, but on a daily basis across all of India. We had good success. Very soon we had pan-India presence. The Asia Development Bank picked it up and sent it to Bhutan, to Philippines. Everything was on the cloud. We had 1 million patients by 2019, and we are pulling the data with great happiness, trying to say, what will we find? This cartoon kind of summarizes the problem. Very soon we realized almost everything is wrong. Diagnosis is equal to symptoms in most of medical care, and a combination of some painkillers, some vitamins, some antihistamines, some creams accounted for 95% of patient care. So basically, we could, as use this Dilbert cartoon, we could do a lot with the data, but not much was worth doing. So we abandoned this particular project. And of course, in the middle, we did try to get into see whether if we could not visually make any great sense of it, could a machine learning algorithm drag something out of it? Of course, we didn't really go too far down that line. Fundamentally, if your data is bad, nothing can rescue it, and no amount of conclusions can. Although there is a line of thought that does believe you can infer something, but we'll come back to that later. And meanwhile, a different thing had started in our lab. And ultimately, I'll just show this slide once. AI is always of one of three types. Either you know the answer, you want the AI to do what you do not know the answer, you want the AI to figure it out for you by unsupervised learning, you don't provide the answer. And the last, it's not one learning, one classification, it's multiple steps. A simple example would be self-driving cars. Do I have a road in ahead of me? No, it's a wall. Turn the wheel. Do I have a road ahead of me? No, it's a wall. Keep turning. Until I have a road, I can keep driving that, right? I mean, it's not one decision. It's a policy. And we'll come back to that later when we speak about DeepMind. So what I had in the lab, and this is the beauty of being in a biology lab where you also do health type stuff, we were very interested in mitochondria. And one of the things we had noticed is that under stress, mitochondria change from this shape to these kinds of shapes, eventually to these shapes. And roughly this is when the cells die. And lots of reactive oxygen species get produced. So I had a chemical engineer in the lab who was good with AI. I had another person in the lab of the opposite gender who was supposed to be counting all these mitochondria because, ultimately you need to make graphs. And very soon I was to learn later on that, the two were going around together and he really wanted to save her time so they would have more time for each other. So he came out with a random forest machine learning system to automatically classify the mitochondria. And then it became like this. The blues would be the thread like, then the pink would be the donut shaped, and the red ones would be the blob shaped. And apologies, I didn't come up with better words those days, but now they got stuck in literature. so, so now blob shaped mitochondria is very much part of literature. And these are automatic classifications, and we could quickly infer that this donut shape happens to be a reversible point, after which it's irreversible. More work was done that I'm not going to bore you with. But with this kind of work now starting in the lab, we could also start applying to other kinds of problems that were less difficult to solve. And while we abandoned the e-health center almost completely, because it simply told us that healthcare is bad, which was not the point, we decided to pick up other problems worth attacking. And around this time, this is from the New England Journal, 2012, The Next Frontier of Medicine, the glimpse of the next century in medicine. And I've highlighted some words here for you, which are very important as we go towards the end of this talk. It says very clearly that in medicine, we are going to be at a point where we will use algorithms that doctors neither fully understand nor is it intuitive to them, yet they will use. And while it seems wrong, why should doctors be using things they don't understand? I would argue to you, we do that all the time, every day. I mean, even if you ask me, how does aspirin work? I would say we don't completely know even today. We ultimately base a lot of what we do on trials and evidence from those trials regarding whether something works or doesn't work, how it works. Often, what we think about how it works turns out to be wrong anyway. So, there's something important to keep in mind, and I'm not going to spend too much time about my lab's work then, but we had two doctors, some of whom you might know, who came to my lab at that time to do PhDs in data science. Tapritesh is now a professor at Triple IT Delhi, and Kaundinya is now a senior scientist at THSTI in Faridabad. Tapritesh worked on using machine learning of oscillometry to classify diseases and predict exacerbations better. He showed that in kids followed with asthma, you can predict people who will exacerbate more with some degree of accuracy. Kaundinya worked on NMR spectra of the exhaled breath condensate of again children with asthma, and he showed how you could use ML to predict signatures that predict more severe, difficult to control asthma. And also, he did other work in identifying asthma. But before I go further, I want to go back a little in history. Machine learning is not new. If you divide into three golden ages, first, second, and third, all the way back, the concept of a neuron, the idea that things will give an input, and after that input, there will be an output. And multiple things can give input, that's like the dendrites. There'll be one output, the axon, was all the way back in the 1950s and 60s. The idea of layers came from something very simple. If you were to sum things up and do linear stuff, you can ultimately draw lines or planes. Now, as long as your reds are here and blues are here, one single line can separate them. If you have something like this, it's called the XOR problem, very famous one in the history of ML, you can no longer draw a single line. But you can draw two lines. You can draw them like this and this. Between is red, outside is blue. You can draw it like this and this. Inside is blue, outside is red. But basically, you now need layers. And you need layers to combine for the final answer. And ultimately, around this time, when you get to the second golden age, comes the work of Geoff Hinton, for which he eventually won the Nobel, interestingly, in physics, because there is no Nobel for computer science, is that if you build these kinds of multiple layers and you have an error, you can put the error back into the entry of the network. And you can ask the network to keep adjusting its weights until the error becomes as close to zero as possible, which creates the idea of the first self-learning system. See, now you don't need to train it. As long as you have a classification, you don't need to figure out the weights will go round and round and round until the weights are classified. It's not that trivial a problem. There are lots of things in this that are important, but let's leave it at that for the time being and let's move forward and I'll come back to the third golden age with GANs and transformers a bit lately. So now that you know how to make networks and you know how to tune networks to find something, what would it take to tell that this is a dog? You could take every pixel and you could try to train the network on the entire image, and you would find it doesn't work very well. It doesn't work very well because all the possibilities of every pixel of a dog are simply too many for your compute to handle. But on the other hand, all of you must have seen these WhatsApps. They will send you something, ask you to cover half the line, and you can read without seeing the other half of the line, right? Cover the top half or the bottom half, you can just read smoothly. A little stroke can tell you whether it's a F or not, right? Just looking at that stroke. In fact, anybody who can read my handwriting clearly does not need to read the entire letter to know what I write. Because nobody can read my handwriting, including myself. It's only little strokes that tell you whether what T is coming or an I came somewhere. So the idea is you do extract features. Now imagine you're trying to find a C. A C is really about, say, two right angles, right? If I were to run a right angle finder and rotate it all over the graph, it'll find me all the right angles. An O would have more, a C would have these, a G would have one more coming up over here. I mean, ultimately, the C will get converted into a feature map. And I could run multiple types of features using these kernels, and these are called CNLs. You have now converted the image into features. And actually, our brains work exactly the same way. Our brains are trained to look at features, edges, angles, moving. And then if you have a huge amount of data, this alone will not do it. CNNs, by the way, are 1980s. Jan LeCun thought of it for the first time for automatic handwriting detection in the 1980s. But it's only when massive amount of digital data, because of the internet, became available in places like the LXNet that you could train computers through CNNs to recognize almost anything. And then, it became very good for dogs and cats and monkeys and humans and things like this because the number of images were massive. It was less good, say, for diabetic retinopathy because number of images were fewer. And if you look at the paper from Google, it took about 30,000 to do it. So came the next problem. Well, we are good with CNNs, but sometimes in the medical world, our data is very small. This came the beginning of what you call the third golden age of AI, generative adversarial networks. Now, a typical human medical student or resident probably requires only, say, 100 times something to be shown before they become very good at it. While a CNN type system will take 30,000. Why? Because we know what it is. What is this knowledge? Why does it take me only a few x-rays? Because I know what an x-ray is. What does that mean? I can draw an x-ray for you. I mean, I'm terrible, but I can still draw an x-ray for you. So you could argue that if a computer could draw an x-ray before it used CNNs to classify things in an x-ray, it required less x-rays. Okay? How do you train a computer to draw an x-ray? You take two competing AIs. One, called the generator, generates an example of an X-ray. The other, the discriminator, it doesn't know what tuberculosis looks like. It does not know what this looks like. It simply has an access to every X-ray database, so it knows what X-rays look like. It will try to look at this example and say, is this an X-ray? And they go round and round and round until the time the second one, the discriminator, can no longer tell whether the generator produced a real X-ray or a fake X-ray. At that point, you would argue the discriminator system knows what an X-ray is, or the generator system, actually. And you could transfer this learning to the next AI and give it only 100 X-rays of tuberculosis. It will pick it up instantly. And this is very important when we were working with IPF. We got images from AIMS Delhi. We had about 20 high quality CTs and notations of IPF to work with because we were trying to classify fibrosis, micronodularity, ground glassing, things like this. This is artificial after 800 rounds. This is real. That also looks like an HRCT. This also looks like HRCT fibrosis. 800 rounds are going round and round. We can start generating artificial examples of fibrosis. At this point, just 20 HRCTs with labeling were enough for us to reach this kind of performance where you're trying to label ground glassing versus fibrosis versus things like this. There's unpublished work with AIMS Delhi, much more needs to be done, but it became very useful during the COVID time when we applied this towards detecting COVID 19 on chest x rays. Again, an imperfect system, but we had lots of x rays, few examples of COVID 19, perfect examples. You can simulate the COVID 19 things, you can build discriminators. It all worked decently well. I'm not going to claim it was rocket science, but this was a good application in my lab of using GANs and everything else together for images. But around this time, the world shifted again. Demis Hassabis, who started DeepMind, made AI super cool. I'm going to come to how he made it super cool later, but he said this: just as mathematics turned out to be the right language of physics, we think AI will prove the right method for understanding biology. The rest of my talk, I'm going to focus on this and tell you why I think he has a point. Let's start with what he did. He basically invented what is called deep reinforcement learning. In deep reinforcement learning, let's say you want a computer to learn to play a video game. One is you train it on one video game, right? You teach it to play that. Second is you give it a general method. General method is watch a game, learn what victory means. From any point in the game, work yourself forward onto the best strategy and learn the strategy entirely on your own, given the rules of the game. It's very much like reinforcement learning I talked to you about regarding is it a wall? No. Is it a road? No. Turn. Except it can go at micro scale over many, many moves. And ultimately, they showed for 29 video games, a general AI could learn to play any of them and beat the top human players. A huge milestone, and obviously, everybody loved it, great applications. But he quickly pivoted to real challenging problems of the world. And for that, he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. He's not a chemist. Why can't protein folding be thought of like a game? It's a protein, you fold it, there are moves, there is a right answer, that's victory, and you could take the entire problem and attack it the same way you attacked a video game. And that was the title over here, from gamer to protein biologist. Anyway, the first time this was done, there was a global competition called CASP. In CASP, what you do is recently structures of some proteins have been solved, but not been released to the public. You send out the sequences of those amino acids to the entire world, and the best labs in the world will participate and submit their solution. And then you look at every solution versus the right answer, you give them marks. The very first time DeepMind entered CASP, it blew away the human labs. I mean, these were expert, top human labs that had been working on structural biology for decades. It didn't beat them on every protein. In a given protein, the top human lab could do better than AlphaFold. But no human lab could consistently solve across all types of proteins compared to DeepMind. So it was a winner by far, but typically it was not always number one. It was often number two. It was a consistent two or three, but on aggregate, it was by far the topper because the humans topped one place, failed another badly. But even this probably doesn't explain where we are today, because now it could do lots of things that can be gamified. There is a victory, there is a method, there are certain limitations. You understand the rules of the game, the fundamental rules. And by the way, almost every game is broken. Most things of this type are broken. Computers can do it better than humans. There's not even a point doing otherwise. But computers didn't have knowledge. Because where is knowledge? Knowledge is in our text, in our libraries, right? In our heads, but mostly in our libraries. And computers struggle very differently from humans. The dog did not cross the road because it was tired. That's GPT-4o. It understands the dog is tired. The dog did not cross the road because it was white. GPT-4 understands the road is white. All I did was change this word, tired and white. How do you know that once I'm referring to the dog and once to the road, right? That's what computers could not do earlier and GPT can do. Because the word tired goes with dog, you don't say road was tired. Although in Hindi, we could say badi thaki si sadak thi. Right? I mean, this is a colloquial way of saying bekar si, thaki ke no. But at least in English, you'll never say the road is tired. And similarly, a dog can be white. There's nothing saying a dog cannot be white. But you will say fat, you will usually not say white. Right? It is the understanding of what goes with what. In other words, the minute you see tired, your attention goes to dog. The minute you see wide, your attention goes to road. And the reason it is easy for you is your attention switches automatically. Computers do not know this concept. The biggest paper in the last, this age of AI, was this paper, Attention is All You Need. Vaswani, an Indian IIT student, was critical in this. Interestingly, this paper comes out of Google. Not a single one member of this team is still at Google. Every one of them left, 5 members, and their cumulative worth is over $5 billion. And the reason Google did not take it up and OpenAI did is Google, in fact, Google even made a chatbot like ChatGPT before um, OpenAI made it. They had come out with a particular software that would classify images. When it saw black people, it called them monkeys. And that led to a political storm. So Google lost a lot of ad revenues because of racial profiling, discrimination, black people being called monkeys. It didn't want to experiment with a system that would make these errors, right? It had a chatbot. It could say very wrong things if they were there in the literature. It could say right things. There isn't no right or wrong. It just knows what goes with what. You start with a gali, it will complete it for you. So anyway, that's not what Google wanted, and Google did not work on it, and this team got disappointed and left. And the OpenAI founders still say they were always looking back at over their shoulders, thinking Google must be coming with something. Google must be coming with something, and it never came. But what it basically works out is there is basically a query, a key, and a value, and you can see what word goes with what. So in this example, if fluffy blue creature roamed the verdant forest, you can see that fluffy and blue, for example, will have very high values with creature but not with forest, and verdant will go with forest. And you can break your sentence into chunks. You can calculate these values. You can create vector embeddings of these values. Ultimately, you end up with something like this. You have an input, it gets encoded. On another side, you could use for translation, you can decode it. And the best part is you could come from two different angles. You can encode in one and decode in the other. Translation was once thought to be a hard problem. We thought that we would need expert linguists training computers how to translate. Translation turned out to be amongst the softest problems there were. Some people use it as an evidence that it was one human proto language, and all of us, despite the fact our languages are so different, came from that proto language. There are two evidences for this. One is in that in New Zealand, in Australia, the Aborigines were separated from the rest of humanity 40,000 years ago. Even they have a rich vocabulary. And fundamentally, on the vector embeddings, every language spoken by man looks so similar that translations have become great. All of you would have noticed this. Until a few years ago, you put something in, you can get nonsense out. These days, it does a pretty good job. It does it across multiple languages because the idea of transformers or vector embeddings completely transformed decoding and encoding for languages. But is that all it can do? It can pretty much do anything as long as you train it on massive amounts of data with sufficient compute. And how much compute? If any of you use X, you are used to Grok. How many of you used X and Grok? Young people? Only a few. Okay, fine. Grok 3 was trained on 100,000 GPUs. What are the total number of GPUs in India? 20,000, right? So all GPUs in India put together are 20,000. Grok 3 of X was trained on 100,000 GPUs in a system called the Colossus. But that shouldn't be a reason for us to worry because everything it is being used for, we can use almost for free. In fact, I would say AI will be a great equalizer. So what can you train it on? Just language? No. Anything that follows a sequence. DNA, RNA, protein, amino acids have a sequence. This goes with that EHR data. There is a sequence to things. An event occurs, the roots of it were in the past. This happens, this will come later. Pretty much anything all the way up to the entire planetary data as a time series can be used to build a foundation model, and has already been done. The biggest foundation model for biology in some definitions of tokens is this one called EVO2. 9.3 trillion tokens, 128,000 genomes available freely via BioNemo. You can enter a mutation, ask what does it do. You can change the function, ask what mutation could possibly cause it. These are actually happening now. These are all, for those of you from the biochemistry, these are all of the biggest models right now in the world. These are almost all available to you, pretty much free of cost. The compute lies outside India. You could do interaction of proteins, and some people would say this is the biggest one because the interaction of proteins is such a big area that you got about 100 billion parameters compared to 40 billion parameters for Nemo 2. To put this again in context, a real LLM is in trillions. So again, this is nothing compared to the amount of power Gemini 3, OpenAI are spending, but then they have far more money. We've already got to the point where you could use what is called smile language. Any compound like this can be shown either as a structure or as a simple sentence. You could convert this into chemical properties on this site, and this is, by the way, IBM Granite. The reason IBM stock has shot up in the last few years is because IBM came out with Granite with wonderful chemistry models. You can work backwards. If I want my drug to be changed this much, show me what the molecule's sequence will be. This is a new company, Lila. It got founded in March. They have no humans. From the original question to robots, everything goes in circles. And they just licensed their first molecule. $300 million came to Lila in March. This year, 40% of global molecules licensed in the world came out of China. None of us are realizing that yet. 40% of all global licensed molecules came out of one country, China, and the majority of them are coming out through AI. Here is something that I don't know is right or wrong, but it's a lovely Nature Medicine paper. You basically take all processes, all exposures, all diseases, all phenotypes, all drugs, all pathways, all components, all the data put together, and you throw them in. And you look at all the vector embeddings that can be created. This does that, this does that. And you ask a question, what existing drug can be potentially repurposed for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? And you get an answer, tretinoin, with a score of 0.95. Now, I have no idea it's right or wrong. But they did analysis to show that for drugs where we do know the answer, this was pretty good. But I don't think that's proof by itself, because where we know the answer, perhaps the data has been generated in that particular way. So either ways, I'm not saying that tretinoin will work for Ehlers-Danlos, but we are at a point where, and here is the full reasoning, by the way. So the AI will provide you reasoning as well. Sure, the bottom, I'll not read it out. We are now at a point where the sum of human knowledge can be read by transformer-based AIs to come up with brand new novel answers that were previously unknown to man. One of my computer colleagues' friends tells me it is impossible for computers to generate new knowledge that has been proven by hard mathematics. What I tell him is that as doctors, if the answer was in the knowledge, but we don't know it and we find it, we call it new knowledge. As a computer scientist, they don't call it new knowledge. They say the person is an idiot. They didn't know the answer. We simply say there is too much to be known. The answer might be lying right there for us to see. Whoever finds it first is a discoverer of that thing. Otherwise, there is nothing in biology to discover. Everything already existed in nature. So we are very different from computer scientists. Their theorems, which are correct in their mathematical way, have no relevance to what we do. But here's the problem. By design, transformers are built on coherence. Coherence is what fits what seamlessly. And coherence is not correctness. There is a fundamental difference between the two. You will hear very coherent narratives on social media. They are patently false. They are coherent in one set of knowledge and they are extremely convincing. In fact, I would argue that the best lies are extremely coherent but incorrect, and they can be hallucinations. All transformer architectures hallucinate. There is absolutely no way to use transformers and not hallucinate. The only way you get out of hallucination is by using something called grounding, where correctness is known separately from the transformer, which also means that for any new knowledge, including tretinoin examples, you cannot know is it a hallucination, is it not? So, where does it help you? It helps you beautifully in research, gives you new ideas to test, does not help you in clinical medicine, where you have to be responsible for that idea while treating the patient. So, what would I say this? I would say this is a wonderful area for a basic researcher to now take up and as part of a clinical trial or preclinical trial or something like that, run with it. It's a terrible idea for a clinician to start immediately giving tretinoin. Tretinoin is reasonably safe, so they could, but I still would not recommend it. The next drug may not be safe. So current state of art is agents. Agents can reduce hallucinations. How? First, by verification through tools, if there is a ground knowledge. So Ashish is here. I was working with Ashish on a neurosurgery book they have produced. And we were trying to train an AI agent that can be accessed perhaps over WhatsApp to answer any question from that book correctly. And if the answer is not in the book, to say, I do not know. Getting the AI to say, I do not know is actually much harder than one imagines. They're very happy giving you meaningless answers. The second is iterative reasoning. So, what you saw in the very first examples of multiple Amitabh Bachchans all discussing with each other was iterative reasoning. They're going back and forth, back and forth. And the last is context persistence, which is when they go back and forth, they sometimes shoot off on a tangent. They've forgotten what the problem was. That's why the design in the beginning was like that, a critic and a PI who keeps bringing them back to the ground. When you have multiple AIs as agents working together, you can suddenly decide to solve a problem on the earth and they might be in the stars. So the PI and the critic brings them back to ground from time to time. So I'm going to start winding down by showing you this, which is beautiful or frightening depending on your point of view. This is a triple room. Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer was made by Google. Amy can be a patient, Amy can be a doctor, Amy can be a critic. So, Amy the patient speaks to Amy the doctor and has a conversation about their disease. And Amy the critic keeps reading the conversation, keeps telling the doctor, the conversation could have been better this way. After enough rounds, and God knows how many given the amount of compute Google has, no real data is being used. None. They're not recording any human doctor patient conversation. They don't need to go to AIMS, PGI, nowhere. Based on the sum total of known human knowledge, completely imaginary conversations are happening between Amy the patient, Amy the doctor, and Amy. And the critic is criticizing all those conversations. At the end of it, based on all this, with medical reasoning, with QAs, with summarization, all these things, Amy can now start talking to the patients and end up with a diagnosis, a treatment, and an escalation. Now you go to the equivalent of a clinical trial. The equivalent of a clinical trial, and it's not a perfect one, I will come back to the problems later. You take 100 OSCE patient actors. You take them from India, Canada, and UK to make sure there's a diverse set of diseases. You have Amy the doctor or a human doctor, here PCP, primary care physician, interact with the patient actors until the time it's over, right? Diagnosis is made, management is done, escalation is done. You have a specialist physician rate that interaction on top three diagnostic accuracy, which means take their top three diagnosis, see was it in there, the management plan, and escalation recommendation. You ask the patient actor, tell them, did you feel confident in the care you were getting during that conversation? Did you perceive openness and honesty on the other side? Did you feel empathy on the other side? There's a radar plot. The closer you are to the boundary, the better it is. And what you can say is that even this is last year's paper, by the way. Even last year, Amy was better than the PCP they took in for that on a majority of these. In fact, nowhere does the PCP actually cross Amy. Amy does better, particularly in empathy. Now, you could find this surprising, but I'll tell you, I don't find this surprising at all. When I left India for America, the first training we got was how to sound empathetic, not how to be empathetic, how to sound empathetic. In India, you can afford to scold a patient, right? America, they will not tolerate it. So, when you come from foreign medical schools and you come there, they train you to sound empathetic. And Amy, of course, doesn't care, right? There is no workload, there is no work life balance, there is nothing else. Timey time. So, in fact, in San Francisco Bay Area, nurses who used to call patients with CHF to check off a bunch of 10 questions, make sure nothing is going wrong, now are being replaced by AI agents. They can chat about the weather if the patient goes off track. Elderly people typically have CHF. They can periodically bring them back to the 10 questions that need to be answered. And wherever something is there, they can pass the phone to the doctor. So these things are already happening. And by the way, the problem with that is, of course, that um, patient actors will typically present with a typical narrative. A real patient may not. So a synthetic conversation built on typical textbook knowledge will do well with patient actors. And second, doctors don't just use text. They look at a patient and make a diagnosis, right? I mean, I would say most doctors in the room would agree 90% of what you do is done by the time the patient has walked in, sat down, and said a few things. So it's unfair to PCPs, but we do have the new Amy. It's called multimodal Amy. This is just out a few months ago. It has vision. It can see, it can read ECGs, it can read clinical records. It doesn't rely only on conversations. Again, this is a graph just like the last one. You can again see the pink is better than the blue. So multimodal EMI is also doing a decent job, but the patient hasn't yet walked in. So it's not quite the same. Now it starts coming to the challenges. Many years ago, we started imagining what would healthcare be like in a digital age of AI. And we had a very interesting set of people as our commissioners. You can see a name that all of you will recognize, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, at that time the chief scientist of WHO, as one of our commissioners amongst people from around the world. What we thought was these four things are all critical. Particularly number two, building governance architectures to foster trust, govern data better, but very importantly, to invest in the enablers of digital transformations, including AI, for public health. So I'm going to start now going to what I'm doing currently to end this down. I'm at the Koita I'm the dean for the School of Biosciences, but I also head what's called the Koita Center for Digital Health at Ashoka. The other Koita Center is at IIT Bombay. We try to see how you bring together these cutting edge things together into a vision for the future. One of the top things we are doing, and this is something that's, you can call it a shameless advertisement if you like, but this is basically we are working with open source medical models because A, we do not believe that Gemini, OpenAI that are closed can ever be used for public health. The reason is the models change, they're outside your control. I cannot imagine a government deploying them in public health. So you can only work with open source models, but the problem with open source models is nobody is willing to pay to generate the data. So we have come up with Praman. This has been funded by the Gates Foundation with ICMR to us and them, where you create a platform where you can deploy multiple small and large models. You can have a community of users and doctors across the country, use them in scenarios, give feedback. The teams can work on continuously improving based on where they go wrong, and then eventually move towards little RCTs, which are real RCTs, with shadow trials. This is what we call them. I'll come to it if you want. So right now we're in the beginning of launching this system, trying to get doctors involved, people who want to become part of this entire ecosystem. We typically prefer residents and interns, and well, you don't have interns at PGI, but residents, because they tend to be very digitally native. We're also trying to work on other layers like voice. In India, unless you reduce the work of doctors or healthcare workers, there is no real good incentive. So, task shifting. So, can you listen to voice and do a lot of the routine stuff for entry that currently plagues the healthcare system? That's with Microsoft research. We are working on better benchmarks. Current benchmarks, we think, favor the AI. So, what we did here, and this is work by Suvrankar Datta, ex radiologist, now doing AI research. If you were to take spotter cases, a spotter case is a case that if you, as a radiologist, are shown the case and you fail to make the diagnosis, they'll fail you roughly. Not exactly, but certainly, friends of mine in the audience will certainly fail you, but others may let you miss two or three. What we see is given spotter cases where a radiologist is about 83% accurate and a trainee who has just entered radiology is around 50% accurate. You can see Claude was terrible, Grok was terrible, O3 was terrible, GPT-5 was terrible, but Gemini 3.0 Pro just a few weeks ago became decent. But this is nowhere near as good as a radiologist, nowhere near. And what you will find is that if you were to take away the image and provide the full clinical history, it'll do a better job. But a radiologist lives and dies on an obvious diagnosis on an image. It is not one thing, train for fractures, train for tuberculosis, it's anything. An X-ray goes up, it's a spotter. A CT goes up, it's a spotter. And so these kinds of benchmarks that really look at what humans would call terrible failure. If a spotter image was there and the AI missed it, they will be held to pay, right? So we have to test them that way. Then, of course, we have to come up with a national AI strategy for health. So we are providing policy support to the government and WHO Zero. So this is something that recently occurred in Vijayawada, which is probably one of the most forward-looking states in India under Chandrababu Naidu. So we are trying to develop what the national AI strategy would be. Then we are working on creating useful AI assistants for local problems. This is work done with AIMS, and this is for a typical screening in their clinics. Patient comes in with abdominal pain. Can you do a lot of the work before maybe triage, see which one needs to be seen first? And then we are trying to do things that nobody is doing much about, which is palliative care. If for every time you have to bring your palliative care patient to see the doctor, it's not going to work. So, and the number of palliative care people is so few, and diagnosis is not really the point. Typically, if the person with terminal COPD is short of breath, there are some very simple things to do. So we are trying to capture a knowledge base. We are trying to capture standard operating protocols. We are trying to do what we did, for example, in neurosurgery with a textbook that you can, with a operating procedure thing that you convert. Can you give them the obvious answer sitting in the house? Again, that's what's happening. Then we are working with health data ecosystems. Everybody wants the data, but India has a Digital Privacy Act. How would you be compliant? How would you create open APIs with consumer grade variables in which it is still ethical in a way that you can share your data for research? Most consumer variables today are sending their clouds to China, America, somewhere like that. How would you build that ecosystem in India? Our students recently using an Indian variable, Koki, have now created an entire Indian cloud version where you can collect research grade data from the PPGs, the O2 sensors, the temperature sensors, and the motion. And they have even done a little small startup. I'm not part of it. And they're trying to create these ecosystems with seamless onboarding of patients. Part of it kind of goes to, grants in lung diseases that we were writing. We now have a grant in which we're trying to predict asthma exacerbations before they happen by looking at data coming out of a smartwatch. So we think the same ecosystem will be important in other diseases as well. So that's what we are doing. But as I now totally wind down, these are the problems we must solve for health AI to succeed. If we don't solve this, there is no success. We have to get better with data solidarity. Is informed consent same as consent? No, it's not. And who can get consent? Somebody with something to give. Every day you click OK on some consent 100 times because you want to read a website. So people with the biggest lollipops will get the consent the fastest. Big global players can get consent faster. Anyway, there's no information in those consents. Or there is so much fine print, nobody wants to read it. So if you really want to create a level playing field, you need to think of data solidarity, where misuse of the data is strictly punished, but use of the data becomes easy. It's a very important concept. And this will happen more if you create transparent open architectures, non-exploitative commercial models, explicit statements of intent, and uncomfortable discussion on ethics. UK recently decided to use AI to allocate livers in transplant. Very soon, young people started piling up for livers. Old people of similar severity quickly went down. Why? Only guesses, but most likely somebody thought likelihood of dying in the next 1 to 2 years should be the way to allocate livers. Makes sense at one level, but an 82-year-old person, even without a liver disease, is more likely to die than a person who is 20 years old with severe liver disease. Is that really the right thing? Then a 70-year-old person with severe liver disease is more likely to have been a chronic alcohol abuser who burnt out their liver. A 20-year-old person probably has a genetic disease. A human liver transplant committee that does not include an economist who will say the guy who drank all the alcohol paid a lot of taxes. But after removing the economist from the committee, will probably give the liver to the 20-year-old person with a genetic disease who might be an economic burden thereafter. There are all kinds of interesting things about who we as humans are that AI cannot capture. That's humanity. It's not always logical. It's not always captured in an algorithm, but we need to get better at knowing what we want. This is actually the last slide. I'm going to give you two conflicting messages side by side, as if I didn't give enough already. The first is by far the biggest danger is that you think you understand AI. So be careful while you use it. The second is doubt it, but don't let it stop you from using it. The world has clearly changed. There is no future in which AI does not become increasingly used. For all the young people in the room in particular, you have to imagine the future with AI. Train yourself to use it better. Don't worry too much about replacement. Like I said, many things are a long time ago, and there will be enough hallucinations in AI to keep us all employed for a very long time. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, sir, for that visionary and immensely valuable oration that has opened new perspectives on the transformative and the big power of the data, the big data, and foundational AI, especially in biomedicine. The Department of Biochemistry expresses its deepest gratitude for you to accept our invitation and enriching us with your valuable insights. As a token of our appreciation, I request Professor R.K. Ratho to kindly felicitate our orator, Dr. Anurag Agrawal. Can we have a big round of applause? Thank you. We have received a message from Professor Arnath's family. The message reads: We extend our sincere gratitude to PGIMER and the Department of Biochemistry for hosting the oration lecture in the name of our father, Professor R. Nath, who devoted nearly 4 decades of his distinguished academic career to this institution. While he achieved many professional milestones, his leadership was defined by something far more enduring: his deep sense of belonging and care for the department, which he regarded as an extended family. Our childhood memories are closely intertwined with many students, faculty members, and staff who were welcomed into our home over the years. The bonds formed through those interactions have endured, fostering a lasting sense of respect and connection. To us, the department continues to feel like an extended family. We are especially grateful to Professor Anurag Agrawal for delivering the oration lecture and for honoring our father's legacy. We convey our warmest thanks and best wishes to everyone involved. Now, I'd like to request Professor Jodhdeep Kaur to present the vote of thanks.
Yeah, a very good afternoon to you all. It gives me immense pleasure to propose a vote of thanks on 11th Arnath Memorial Oration. At the outset, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the orator, Dr. Anurag Agarwal, for delivering this oration. We are extremely enlightened and inspired by your talk, sir. We are indeed grateful to you for sharing your thoughts on this very important subject. I would like to express a deep sense of gratitude to Professor R.K. Ratho, our esteemed Dean and Acting Director, for taking out time from his busy schedule to grace this occasion. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all the esteemed guests, dignitaries, faculty colleagues, residents, demonstrators, research scholars, and students to join us today. Finally, I would like to extend my profound thanks to the faculty members and the ministerial staff of our department for their efforts in arranging this event. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, we formally conclude the 11th Professor Arnath Memorial Oration. And thank you so much to all of you for taking out time from your busy schedule and attending this important uh, oration and gracing the ceremony. All participants are cordially invited for high tea and informal academic interactions. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.